This Make Art activation asks you to reflect on the tactile work and delight of art, an iterative exchange with human makers and robot fabricators. We recreate and describe assembled art objects in tactile and audible ways.
In particular, the stimulus of this Make Art activation are the 3D printed textures available in MCD's current exhibition, Mr. Roboto. These 3D printed textures were created in collaboration with a robot. These are haptic pieces that you can touch and explore by visiting the Museum of Craft and Design. Now on to the project.
For this Make Art activation, collect your materials. Mesh panels, plastic, paper, fabric, adhesive embellishments like felt, foam, sandpaper, stickers, Velcro, other embellishments like zip ties, chenille stems, beads, string, yarn and ribbon, buttons, binder ring, and if you'd like, glue dots, scissors, and additional items like tape and yarn. Here are some instructions. Select elements from Mr. Roboto featured artwork, 3D printed textiles, that you would like to recreate using the tactile art materials. Next, choose mesh panels. You can cut them if you'd like. And just note that with some of the materials, the edges of the fragile mesh might fray. So leave a border of at least a ½ inch, or you can reinforce the perimeter to make it stronger. For example, with tape around the edges. Next, attach materials to your mesh panels to create an assemblage or a collage design using objects on each panel. And here are a few design ideas. You could remake the printed textile designs from Mr. Roboto. You might like to repeat the same design on each panel if you make more than one, using different materials each time. You could create a unique design on each panel using similar materials, or make up your own new designs. So you could, for example, take some thread or yarn and start to weave it through your mesh panel and tie it around your mesh panel to create some texture and to change the shape, or to create an attachment, adding materials that you enjoy, threading through a button or attaching a piece of foam. Allowing yourself to experiment a little bit with which materials work together and the different sensations that you notice of texture or color, shape. Just noticing what part of the robot's art inspired what you're making. What textures, shapes, and colors do you like?
Something that I also really like about this process is when materials don't work exactly how I expected them to. So for instance, this rope that I was using, I only partially threaded through. And so one of the thread pieces within that is actually kind of hasn't completely threaded through because my mesh is a little bit too small for this material, so I thought. But it's creating some volume right here on one side. And now the rest of my material for this project, as I'm using it right now, is a little bit different than it was before. So I'm missing some of the tinsel, some of the shimmer that was wrapped up at the beginning. But I've kind of got a material traffic jam happening now on one side. And it's adding some dimensionality to my piece too, which is very similar to some of the 3D printed textiles that were created by the robot arm that actually occur in this wave. They're not completely consistent on just one even plane. So allow yourself to be really flexible with your approach and work in collaboration with the materials that you have in front of you too. And perhaps now, because I tried to thread my larger string through a button and I was unsuccessful earlier, but I wonder now if I will be able to do so. That I also really like about this project is that you're really creating two works of art. Maybe one of them is a little bit more intentional, the side that you're primarily working with. And then maybe one of them is a little bit less intentional, like the back side of your paper mesh.
So the project actually works in multiple dimensions. At first it seems like it's the front side of a piece of paper, but then if you turn it over and find there's a whole other side to it. And then also with some of the parts of this sheet, like one corner is starting to curl, so it also has some depth to it. And with some of the materials, you might decide to intentionally curl them or shape them using the materials that you've chosen.
I'm going to try to do that right now, actually. I know that my mesh canvas I chose is really pliable. It's actually a rug square or a rug mat that you might place underneath the carpet to keep it from slipping. So a lot of these materials you'll probably recognize.
So something else I'm noticing here is, in addition to the qualities, or the elements, I guess, in addition to the elements of line and shape and color and dimension or form, there's also kind of the glintiness of some of the materials. So there's a glint or a glimmer or a gleam to some of the materials that Marie has chosen. And then others are more flat or opaque.
Decided that I am actually not going to tie my button down, but that I am going to hope to use this adhesive, this sticky material, to keep it in place and to add some tension where my rug square mesh is also overlapping, so I can keep this 3D form.
So what is the texture of the adhesive piece you just put down?
Yeah, so this is a very rough piece of sandpaper. Actually, I'm going to see if you'll be able to hear the sound of my fingers scraping against it here too. This is the sound of my fingernails scraping against it. This is with just a smoother on the side of my thumb. And it's a very stark tactile difference with the smoothness of the button and then this almost softness of the rug square underneath too.
What happens when you turn it over?
There's a slight adhesiveness. A lot of it is being blocked by the rug square itself.
You have a panel that feels complete. So there's an option here to go on to make a second one, to make a booklet. So in this sense, each panel that you make could become like the page in a tactile book. A book that you could reorganize at any time by changing the order of the panels. Exactly. A book that would tell its own story. You can give it a title and describe or narrate the sequence of events.
Yeah, I am transitioning from this panel, but it feels to me like a material exploration, like a very soft introduction to some of the characters. You will have different types of mesh in your maker kit, and whether that be if you're doing the maker activation at the museum or at home or with the museum in the community, whatever setting that might be, you should have access to different types of panels. So now I'm curious about this plastic panel. The reason I was drawn to this now was that it feels a lot more firm, a little bit less floppy than the previous material I was working with. And I'm curious to see if I can create something that feels a little bit more structured, perhaps a little bit more like this grid piece or one of these, and that has a little bit more of a pattern, a little bit more symmetry almost to it as well. Wish me luck, craft community, as I embark on this journey.
Good luck. And so in each Make Art kit, there will be a unique set of materials that all have common characteristics. So this panel also is similar to the previous one in its shape and sort of general size, but the qualities of firmness or flexibility are different. This one has a slight light blue color, and the pattern of openings that make the grid are also unique on this piece.
You also should feel empowered to play around with the materials that you have. I'm noticing that this yarn is a little bit too thick to comfortably fit through my mesh panel. So I'm just going to restart. So right now I'm separating some of the fibers in this yarn piece. We will see if I am able to a little bit more easily integrate it with the mesh piece I'm using now. Because
even though a material might arrive in a particular form, there's lots of room to explore and experiment and kind of rework and to rework the material. Holding.
And you should also feel empowered to change your base. I realize that maybe I frayed my yarn too much, and I'm thinking about a different way that I can have my lines become very strong without needing to weave it in and out of my mesh. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually cutting little slits into the sides of my mesh to anchor my material down.
That would really change the texture too.
Yeah.
And give it some height.
Exactly.
You might start to notice that you're going with a particular theme, and you might choose to follow that theme as you're working. I'm noticing a color theme here of the blue, maybe established by the background. Or there might be a particular theme around shape or qualities like springiness or firmness. So in this sense, each panel kind of speaks for itself as it takes shape. As you're working, maybe considering what other everyday objects you can think of that have interesting textures.
This project is all about us as humans reinterpreting what a robot has made. Perhaps a little bit what makes us unique as crafters, what makes us different from a machine, from a robot too. As you might have noticed with the 3D printed textures, they are all one material. They are reasonably uniform in color as well. There are a couple that integrate plastic filament of 2 different tones as well. But the programming that would take the robot to change color, to change material, is more. And we have this flexibility, we have the capacity to kind of, in some ways, build the plane, the art plane, as we fly it too. and make decisions about what works and what doesn't in the moment too. How is that alike, or how is that different from how a robot might function?
It's possible that we might start out with the idea of making one thing and then just through the creative process changing as we go along. There are surprises along the way.
With that, maybe what are the pros and cons to the human approach, and what are the pros and cons to the robotic approach? And this exhibition really is all about how do we collaborate to make art forms. One is not better than the other, they are different. And perhaps where does the design element come in? How do we think about what we want to make? And then where does the precision come in? The ability to be scalable or be reproducible using a machine that is a little bit less prone perhaps to human error than we are as well.
Do you think it changes art when humans work with robots to make it?
I do think it changes art as we work with robots to make it. I think it allows us to think really differently about the mediums that we use, and to also think about language, as we know that there are computer languages which we use to communicate with robots, which are really different than how we would communicate to human artists with one another too. What do you think, Ray?
I think there are some new possibilities that open up potentially. It's like working with any new tool. I think there are also possibilities most of us haven't imagined yet. I wonder about access to those technologies and tools, and it does bring up the question for me in general of what it means to collaborate or cooperate with others. And we're using that same language to talk about collaborating with robots, and just kind of what kind of agency does that assign robots? Like what is involved in collaboration? What's required for a truly collaborative or cooperative process? So with the pieces that you've made, each one potentially could stand alone. So you may decide to let each panel speak for itself, attaching a ribbon or string or a binder circle to each panel so that it could be hung up like an ornament or wall art. Or using those kinds of materials, the binder ring or ribbon or string, to attach the mesh panels to each other, making your book. If you attach your panels to make a book, describe the story. So what story does the book tell?
And you can make this into a bit of a game and into a bit of a conversation with those around you as well. Maybe someone might see or perceive something in your story that you don't, and you might perceive something in your story that might not be immediately evident to others as well. And practicing talking about our personal experiences with art and our personal connections, I find it always helps me think a lot more deeply about the pieces in front of me as well. And that is actually a big part of what museums should be doing too, with offering scaffolds and guides and conversation starters for people to make these personal connections too. One access tool in our tool belt here at the Museum of Craft and Design and at a lot of different cultural institutions is visual descriptions as well, for everyone, and especially for the blind and low vision community. How are we able to create different touch points to our projects, and visually describe what there is as well. So for instance, for this piece, and it could be great practice for you to do so at home, I am going to practice. I will start with a piece of art that the robot created. This is a 3D printed textile by Mr. Roboto that is generally square in shape. It is about 8 inches by 8 inches, and it is created with a white filament that comes together in small kind of sloping lines. In some ways, this feels like a grid to me, but a very, very irregular grid, in which the robotic arm made the same movements over and over again. So if I were to start at the top left-hand corner, the robotic arm, and the way that 3D printing actually works is that filament, that this plastic filament is heated up to the point that it melts, making it very pliable, and the robot is then able to apply it in these different shapes as well. And so the general structure of this 8 by 8 piece, square piece, are these looping lines that travel downward from this top left-hand corner as well. And they loop down, creating kind of these bell shapes almost, these upside down parabolas as well. Starting from one high point, traveling down about 1/2 inch and then up again. And this looping, the swooping gesture is repeated over and over again. I would estimate that the robot has done so probably about 20 times per line. And the way that this also occurred was, just as we talked about this piece having some dimension, some depth, is that the robot was printing on a surface that wasn't totally flat. So as the filament was applied and then re-hardened because it was melting, and then when it cools down it hardens into the shape that was applied, that actually sat and melted on this very uneven wave-like surface too. As mentioned, this is very repetitive with these swooping upside down parabolas, 20 in a line, occurring over and over again, and kind of giving this a rugged appearance as well.